Why do I feel so strongly it should be in the book? If it's not going to hurt anybody and it makes for a better poem, I do believe you can play.
How many chances do you think we have to write a poem?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question, because...
You ready?
Yeah?
Yeah? Okay. How are you feeling?
Good.
Okay.
I have an urge to plug my cousin.
You should have an urge to plug your book.
My cousin Nora Kabrinsky did the painting. She lives in Winnipeg. She was a MD. She still is, but she's an artist now. She MDs little. And it's called All the Golden Afternoons, and it's a reference to Lewis Carroll. And this is a Jew bird, but only in my imagination.
When you were putting your collection together, what were you thinking about?
What was I thinking about? There's kind of a backstory. I retired. I'd been writing poems for years and years and years. I'd published 2 books, maybe. And I just never had time to make books, which is a whole thing in itself. So I started looking over all these hundreds and hundreds of poems, and I found some themes. I thought, wow, a lot of these refer to like growing up Jewish and Jewish politics and Palestine and all of those issues, and what it's like to be like a little on the outside of a culture looking in, but also be really impacted and influenced by the dominant Christian culture. So anyway, I just started gathering Jewish poems, and I'm still writing them. Synagogues wasn't written in enough time to get in the book, and I have a few others. So that was one book. I also did Taking a Walk in My Animal Hat that way. I thought, wow, I've written a lot of poems about animals, so I gathered those. Then I had to find themes within those piles, which I sort of did. I find bookmaking difficult in some ways.
What's difficult about it?
Well, it's somebody wrote a book called Ordering the Storm, and it is like that. It's like, for me, every poem I write is a discrete event. It's not necessarily related to other things. I'm not a person who writes on well, apparently I am, but I never really thought about it that way. I just write a poem, and there are people who write what's it called, like theme,
like project-based kind of.
Yeah, and those are the books that often win contests because they're kind of easier, I think, for judges to read because there's a coherence there. But anyway, my very first book, I had lunch with Susan Josephson one day, and I said, I've written like 60 poems about my dog Bruno. And she said, oh, let me draw. She ordered them, and she's a Buddhist. So I don't know if she did this consciously, but she gave the poems a seasonal order, which is a traditional order for Buddhist poetry. So she ordered the first one. I just gave her lots of dog poems.
You mentioned that one of your poems felt out of place. Maybe this speaks to the difficulty of ordering books. So
Yeah.
why did you include this poem? So it was the Song of the Shield. What feels so out of place to you in this?
Yeah, no, I don't mean it feels out of place. I think it belongs in there. But I think other people may get to that point and say, huh, what does that have to do with all these Jew girl poems? And, you know, in a way, the answer is complicated. I actually placed it in the book, and then I thought, wow, someone's going to ask me that. Why do I feel so strongly it should be in the book? Anybody have any ideas? Anybody? It's Song of the Shield, and I think you missed that. But it's about a woman named Sonequa Hester, who was 23 years old, by the way, who died shielding the body of a 14-year-old kid. She was talking to teenagers on her porch, and there was a drive-by shooting. And she wrapped herself around this kid and saved him and died. And I just was knocked out by, I could cry now thinking about it. So why is it in here? I guess I believe that Black Americans and Jewish Americans are intertwined somehow, that they have worked together in the past, but they're also there's a rivalry and sometimes antagonism, and it's kind of tragic, but there were a lot of Jews involved in the civil rights movement because they felt that could be me, you know, and that's why a lot of us who are in Jewish Voice for Peace, or if not now, feel the same way about the Palestinian struggle. That could be us. These sufferings are so similar. So, so that was one reason. And then one day I was thinking, oh God, I'm blanking on the name, who said, black people took the bullet for Jews in this country. Who said that? Malcolm X. How could I forget Malcolm X's name? Malcolm X said that. He didn't say that in an anti-Semitic way or anything like that. It's true. You know, I mean, Jews pass for the most part. There are Jews of color, many. So those Jews aren't passing as easily. I always think of Jews as off-white if they're white. Like, they're not really totally accepted. They're not white. But anyway, so I think that was another thing, that she took the bullet. So I think that in the depths of my consciousness, probably my unconsciousness, I was kind of thinking about that idea of Malcolm X, of taking the bullet for someone else. And it's just so moving and so sad. It's tragic.
It seems like a lot of what you write is tied to current events.
Some is.
What is the role of the present and things that are happening in the world?
Oh, God.
In writing?
Yeah. Well, I've been writing about Israel-Palestine since the 90s. But I was like a poem here and a poem there because, you know, it was just like on me. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. But I had so many I was raising kids and taking care of older parents. There was just way too much going on to get deeply involved in that struggle until the last bombing of Gaza, which was in 2005, 2000. It was before that. It was, yeah. That's when I joined JVP. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard, you know, people say stay away from politics, don't write political poems. Poetry makes nothing happen. I don't know if that's true, and I'm reading some really good poems lately that do address, you know, I don't ask me to name one because I can't. But there are poems on some level, maybe just as all poems are elegies, I think. I often think that maybe most poems are political in one way or another, even if you're not conscious of it, because you're living the life you live, which means you're not living the life that someone else is living, and they're either invisible or they're in the background, or you're deeply aware of it, or you exploit it, but whatever, it's there. It's there. We're all interconnected. Yeah, and every once in a while the newspaper presents something that you get gobsmacked by.
How connected do we have to be with fact when we talk about current events and things that are true for us?
In poems? Oh, that's such a good question. That's a really good question. I tend to be, in a way, hell-bent on preserving the facts, and that means that when I write a poem with someone's real neighbor in it, real name in it, like what Jimmy Masseria wrote with a stick in the snow, I live in fear because that poem is in a book that hasn't gotten published yet. I live in fear that Jimmy Masseria is going to pick up that book and say, hey, you didn't ask me. And I try to change the name, but I can't. It just doesn't feel right to me. I recently wrote a poem about a little girl named Jessica Yesikov, who would drone this phrase all the time, and it's still in my head. Push me. She wanted someone to push her on her swing. And I wrote a poem about it finally. I've been talking about her for years. Where is she? Who is she now? I tried to find her on Facebook, but I couldn't. So there's another lawsuit in the making. But those are just actual names of people. I remember a big argument in APR several decades ago about this, where somebody read a poem by somebody else that appeared in APR, where the facts were really distorted and was really angry and wrote to them or called them and said that was just playing with the facts and that wasn't ethically right. So I remember Steve Abbott saying once, there's a small t and a capital T for truth. If it's not going to hurt anybody and it makes for a better poem, I do believe you can play with the small t. I mean, sometimes we write poems that really are an amalgamation of several experiences that we just condense into one. That's okay. I give thee permission to do that.
I have two more questions, still kind of related to this to a degree. Talking about truth, one of the things you said was, for one of the last poems you read, was you were like, I have to start at the beginning.
Oh, yeah, before I read it.
Mm-hmm. Why do you feel like some poems have to start at those moments, even though you're like, hey, it gets real good later on?
Be patient.
Why
Good question.
do we have to make our readers be patient and not start?
Yeah, with the big boom. Yeah, I think my husband's appearance naked in the hall was the high moment of the poem. But I was interested too in the fact that I wrote a poem that wasn't about dementia. I've been writing a lot of those. I felt so good that I was writing a poem about a painting that I knew so well, and then suddenly it was in front of me. Literally, I almost landed on the floor. I was happy that I wrote that poem, but I also felt like, I don't remember the name of it, but there's a little song that's sung on Passover that runs through all these, the man that beat the dog, that bit the cat, that carried the goat, whatever. It just goes on and on. I felt a little bit like that when I was writing it. And I felt like when something good happens, I guess when something bad happens too, we can trace back to all the ways it could have not happened. If I had not left the lights on in the hall, and then Sonia didn't turn them off, I would not have been woken up, and the poem never would have happened. So that was just one of the many, and if the dog had been upstairs, Sonia would have woken me up, and I would have gone down and said hello to her and turned the lights off. So there were just so many things that led to that poem. And I felt like, and the last line, now it's calling me, because I wasn't really finished with it yet. And I'm just wondering how many people have that experience where, when I started writing again, I remember driving to my teaching gig at Watterson, but I was working on a poem at home, which of course I couldn't get near for a zillion hours. And I wanted to be with it. And I wanted to be with it so intensely that I thought, this is like being in love. I mean, that's how I felt when I stopped going to student teaching. What a thing to do. How irresponsible. Anyway.
So you've referenced again that, in many ways, that poem almost didn't happen.
Yeah,
I guess, like,
it could have not happened.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
So my final question is then, when we get a new poem, how many chances do you think we have to write the poem?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question, because I send myself texts. I have an old iPhone on my bedstand, and I send myself texts if I think of something, but sometimes I never go back to them. There's an energy that you get with that poem, and I think you really need to sit down and work on it. I don't think we get a lot of chances, because there's something burning and alive about it, and asking to be born or to be channeled. That's becoming a cliche. I heard somebody on a Zoom reading say that. We don't channel our poems. Well, I felt like that poem was sort of channeled. Every once in a while, a poem sort of comes out whole. But all those memories that we totally forget about, and then something triggers it. Why, after I found Pat naked in the hall and got him back to bed, was I thinking about that painting? What was the connection there? That was so, I have no idea, but I'm grateful. Yeah, it was a poem of gratitude, but I had to bore you guys with all the details leading up to it. Someone I showed it to said, that's one of your best poems, and I thought, okay, then I'll leave it that way.
Thank you too, Charlene, for being with us. Thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me so much.